Video 21, Part 17C of 25, Outputs from the Estimate Activity Resources Process. The purpose of this video is to develop a WBS to present the deliverables from the Estimate Activity Resources Process. The Estimate Activity Resources Process is the second process in the Project Resource Management knowledge area and is related to the Planning Process group. Please click the like button. Subscribe to my channel and share with others. Thank you. How important is the resource requirements output in the Estimate Activity Resources Process? The resource requirements output of the Estimate Activity Resources Process is critically important. It is not just a simple list, it is a foundational document that enables effective planning, execution, and control. The resource requirements output is a detailed list identifying the types and quantities of resources, such as team members, equipment, materials, and facilities, needed for each activity in a project work package. Key reasons for its critical importance. 1. Foundation for the project budget. This is arguably its most direct and tangible impact. The resource requirements are the primary input for cost estimation, as follows. First, labor costs. The number of hours for each role, such as senior engineer or junior designer, is multiplied by their hourly, daily rate. Second, material and equipment costs. The quantities of materials and the rental duration for equipment are directly translated into costs. Third, without accurate resource requirements, your project budget is a guess, not a plan. 2. Drives procurement and logistics. The output explicitly tells the project team what needs to be acquired, as follows. First, procurement. If you need specialized equipment or bulk materials, the procurement team uses this list to initiate purchasing or rental processes, which can have long lead times. Second, logistics. It answers questions like, do we need to arrange for a specialized lab? Or, how much storage space for materials is required? 3. Enables realistic scheduling and team formation. You cannot create a viable schedule without knowing what resources are available and when, as follows. First, resource availability. The schedule is built by matching the resource requirements against the availability of those specific resources. You can't schedule two tasks requiring the same senior specialist at the same time. Second, team acquisition. The project manager and functional managers use this list to identify, request, and assign specific team members. It's the basis for forming the project team. 4. Input for risk management. An accurate resource list is a powerful risk identification tool, as follows. First, scarcity risks. It highlights dependencies on scarce or highly specialized resources, such as we only have one person certified for this technology. This is a major project risk. Second, cost risks. It identifies resources with volatile or high costs, allowing for contingency planning. Third, logistical risks. It flags complex logistical needs, such as international shipping of specialized equipment, that could derail the project. 5. Basis for communication and stakeholder alignment. The resource requirements document provides a clear, unambiguous basis for discussions with key stakeholders, as follows. First, sponsors. It justifies the budget request. We need this much money because we need these specific resources. Second, functional managers. It forms the basis for negotiations on staff assignments. We need a level 3 Java developer for 160 hours in Q3. Third, the team. It sets clear expectations about who is supposed to do what and with what tools. 6. Foundation for subsequent project documents. The resource requirements output is not an end in itself. It feeds directly into other essential project documents, as follows. First, resource breakdown structure, a hierarchical chart of the resources by category and type. Second, resource calendar, shows when each resource is available. Third, cost baseline, the time-phased budget. Fourth, project schedule, the integrated timeline. How can a poor resource requirements output harm the estimate activity resources process? A poor resource requirements output from the estimate activity resources process directly harms the subsequent estimate activity resources process itself by creating a flawed foundation. It's a case of garbage in, garbage out. Let's clarify the process flow. First, you create the resource management plan, or the how-to guide for resources. Second, in the estimate activity resources process, you determine which resources, such as people, equipment, and materials, and their quantities, are needed for each activity. The key output here is the resource requirements. Third, the resource requirements output then becomes the primary input for the next process. A poor resource requirements output is typically characterized by being, first, inaccurate due to incorrect resource types or quantities. Second, vague due to a lack of specific skill levels, such as one developer instead of one senior Java developer. Third, incomplete due to a lack of resources for certain activities. Fourth, unjustified due to a lack of data or justification for estimates. Here's how such a poor output harms the estimate activity resources process and the project as a whole. 1. Creation of a non-viable or flawed project budget. The resource requirements are a direct input for cost estimation. If they are poor, the cost estimates will be wrong, as follows. First, if you underestimate the number of engineers or hours needed, the project budget will be too low. This leads to budget overruns later, requiring stressful rebaselining or scope reduction. Second, overestimation. If you overestimate, you create an inflated budget. This can make the project appear non-viable compared to others, potentially leading to its cancellation. Or it results in inefficient use of the organization's funds. 2. Ineffective and impractical project schedule. Resources and the schedule are inextricably linked. Poor resource requirements lead to an unrealistic schedule as follows. First, the schedule is built assuming certain resources are available. If the required, specific resources, such as a specialized crane or a security-cleared architect, are not identified, the schedule will have impossible dependencies and deadlines, resulting in unachievable timelines. Second, you may experience constant replanning. As the poor estimates are discovered during execution, the entire schedule must be constantly reworked, leading to schedule slippage, missed milestones, and team demoralization. 3. Inaccurate and risky procurement processes. For material, equipment, or contracted labor, the resource requirements are the basis for procurement as follows. First, you may produce incorrect contracts. Ordering the wrong quantity of materials leads to waste if the case of overordering or delays in the case of underordering. Second, you may experience vendor issues. If you hire a vendor based on flawed requirements, such as needing an electrician but hiring a bricklayer, you'll face performance issues, contract disputes, and rework. 4. Poor team acquisition and development. The acquire resources process relies on knowing exactly what skills and how many people are needed, as follows. First, you may end up hiring the wrong people. Vague job requirements, such as programmer, lead to hiring people without the necessary specific skills, such as Python data scientist, resulting in low productivity and quality issues. Second, you may suffer from team dysfunction. You may create a team that's too large, causing coordination overload, or too small, causing burnout. You also can't plan training or develop your team effectively if you don't understand specific skill gaps. 5. Compromised quality and increased rework. The quality of the work is directly related to the resources performing it, as follows. First, you may experience skills mismatch. Assigning a junior resource to a complex task that requires a senior will likely result in errors, defects, and rework. Second, you may experience rushed work. If resources are overwhelmed due to underestimation, they will rush, ignore quality checks, and produce substandard work. 6. Severe resource overallocation and conflicts. The resource requirements are used for resource leveling and smoothing, as follows. First, you may experience unmanageable workloads. Poor quantification leads to assigning more work to individuals or equipment than they can handle, causing burnout and breakdowns. Second, you may experience cross-project conflicts. At an organizational level, poor requirements make it impossible for the project management office to allocate resources effectively across multiple projects, leading to conflicts and delays company-wide. 7. Erosion of stakeholder confidence and project credibility. When the project immediately starts missing its budget and schedule targets due to poor resource planning, trust is quickly lost, as follows. First, you may experience sponsor distrust. The project sponsor will question the project manager's competence and the viability of the project. Second, you may experience team frustration. The team loses faith in the plan and leadership when they are consistently set up for failure with unrealistic expectations. In conclusion, the resource requirements output is fundamentally critical to project success. It functions not as a simple list, but as an essential dataset that integrates the project's scope, or the what, with the practical aspects of execution, or the how, who, and how much. In contrast, the impact of an inadequate resource plan is not a minor inconvenience. It creates a cascade of negative effects throughout the project lifecycle. From the outset, it can compromise the budget, schedule, deliverables quality, and team morale. Ultimately, what should be a key strength of the estimate activity resources process becomes the project's primary source of risk. As a final message, a well-defined set of resource requirements is indicative of a mature and thoroughly planned project, positioning it for a successful outcome. Conversely, poorly defined requirements force a project to navigate without a roadmap, almost inevitably leading to, first, budget overruns. Second, schedule delays. Third, persistent resource conflicts and shortages. How important is the basis of estimates output in the estimate activity resources process? The basis of estimates is not only important, it is a critical and indispensable output of the estimate activity resources process. While other outputs like the resource requirements, or the what tell you what you need, the basis of estimates provides the justification, assumptions, and constraints that explain how you arrived at those numbers. The basis of estimates is a supporting document that provides all the basic information used to create the resource estimates. It's not the estimate itself, but the foundation on which the estimate is built. What is typically included in the basis of estimates? The PMBOK specifies what basis of estimates should include, at a minimum, as follows. First, methodology used. How was the estimate done? For example, bottom-up, analogous, parametric, or three-point estimating. Second, assumptions. What did you assume to be true? For example, resources will be available on the start date, team has an average skill level, or no major interruptions. Third, constraints. What limitations were considered? For example, A maximum of 2 developers can work in the lab at any time, or budget cap of $50,000 for equipment. Fourth, sources of data. Where did the information come from? For example, historical records from Project XYZ, industry standard cost data book, or interviews with subject matter experts. Fifth, range of estimate and confidence level. Good estimates are not single points. They are ranges, such as plus or minus 15%, or optimistic, 80 hours, most likely, 100 hours, pessimistic, 140 hours. Sixth, risks and inclusions, exclusions. What risks could impact the estimate? What is explicitly included or excluded from the estimate? For example, this includes setup time but excludes time for management reporting. Key reasons for its critical importance are shown as follows. 1. Foundation for credibility and justification. A basis for estimates transforms a number from a guess into a defensible plan. When you present your resource requirements to a sponsor, functional manager, or client, they will inevitably ask, "How did you come up with this?" Your answer can come with a basis of estimates. You can explain the methodologies, historical data, and expert judgment used. Without it, your estimate appears arbitrary and is easily challenged, leading to delays and a lack of trust. 2. Enables informed decision-making. Project sponsors and steering committees need to make trade-off decisions. The basis of estimates provides the necessary context for these decisions. For example, if the estimate for a specialized engineer is high, the basis might show it's based on a limited number of available experts. This allows management to decide if they should train internal staff, hire a contractor, or adjust the project scope. 3. Provides a baseline for monitoring and control. You cannot effectively control what you have not properly defined. The basis of estimates is a key part of the project baseline. During execution, if a task is taking more effort than planned, you can refer to the basis of estimates to see if the original assumptions were wrong, such as we assumed a senior developer, but we were assigned a junior one, or if other factors are at play. This leads to more effective root cause analysis. 4. Facilitates updates and re-estimation. Regarding project's change, when a change request is approved or a risk materializes, you need to update your resource plans. A well-documented basis of estimates allows you to quickly understand the impact of the change and re-estimate efficiently, rather than starting from scratch. 5. Enhances organizational learning. The basis of estimates serves as a historical record. After the project is complete, it can be compared to actual resource usage. This analysis becomes invaluable historical data for future projects, making the organization's estimating capability more accurate over time. How can a poor basis of estimates output harm the estimate activity resources process? A poor basis of estimates doesn't just make the estimate activity resources process less effective. It actively undermines it and creates a cascade of failures throughout the project. Think of the basis of estimates as the footnotes, or source documentation, for your resource estimates. If those footnotes are vague, incorrect, or missing, the entire estimate becomes unreliable and undefensible. Here's a detailed breakdown of how a poor basis of estimates harms the estimate activity resources process and the project as a whole. 1. It creates unreliable and unactionable estimates. The primary output of the process is the activity resource requirements. A poor basis of estimates makes this output useless, as follows. First, you are faced with a situation where you can't justify the numbers. Without a clear basis of estimates, the estimated number of people, hours, or pieces of equipment is just a guess. Stakeholders will rightly dispute this information, and the project manager won't have the data to support their position. Second, you are faced with the impossibility of re-estimating. A project always undergoes changes as it progresses. When a change occurs in the project, a good basis of estimates allows you to understand which estimates are affected and recalculate them quickly. A poor basis of estimates means you have to start from scratch every time, wasting time and effort. 2. It severely impacts project planning and execution. The resource estimates feed directly into the project schedule and budget. A poor basis of estimates poisons these downstream plans as follows. First, you face unrealistic schedules. If the basis of estimates fails to document that the estimate assumes senior-level productivity, but the team is staffed with juniors, the schedule will be impossible to meet. The schedule is built on a foundation of sand. Second, you face inaccurate cost baselines. Resource costs are a primary project cost. An underestimated resource need, such as needing a specialized piece of equipment for 3 months instead of 1, leads directly to budget overruns. The project is doomed to exceed its financial constraints from the start. Third, you face ineffective procurement. If you need to procure resources, such as contractors and equipment, a poor basis of estimates leads to flawed requests for proposals and contracts. You might contract for the wrong type of resource or an insufficient quantity, leading to disputes and delays. 3. It erodes stakeholder trust and credibility. A project manager's credibility is built on reliable planning, as follows. First, you suffer a loss of confidence. When a project manager cannot explain how they arrived at their resource needs, sponsors and clients lose faith. They will micromanage, second-guess every decision, and be less likely to approve future projects. Second, you suffer an inability to secure resources. Functional managers who assign staff are less likely to provide the best resources if they see the request is based on a poorly documented, seemingly arbitrary estimate. They will question the project manager's competence. 4. It makes risk management and problem-solving nearly impossible. A good basis of estimates is a key risk identification tool. A poor one hides the risks until it's too late, as follows. First, you have hidden assumptions and constraints. The basis of estimates is where you document assumptions, such as team will be co-located, and constraints, such as crane is only available 8 hours per day. A poor basis of estimates leaves these hidden. When an assumption proves false, such as the team is distributed or a constraint is hit, it becomes a surprise crisis, not a managed risk. Second, you have no foundation for contingency planning. Contingency reserves, such as time and cost, are calculated based on the uncertainty and risk in the estimates. A poor basis of estimates provides no insight into the level of uncertainty, making it impossible to define rational reserves. You are either overly optimistic, with no reserves at all, or arbitrarily pessimistic, with too many reserves. In conclusion, basis of estimates is the cornerstone of a credible, defensible, and controllable resource management plan. A project manager who diligently creates and maintains the basis of estimates is demonstrating professionalism, foresight, and a commitment to managing the project responsibly. A poor basis of estimates doesn't just create a bad number. It severs the logical chain that connects the project's work to its resource needs, schedule, and budget. It turns the estimate activity resources process from a critical planning exercise into a speculative guessing game, ensuring that the project begins its journey with a flawed and unexecutable map. How important is the resource breakdown structure output in the estimate activity resources process? The resource breakdown structure is critically important. It is far more than just a list. It is a foundational document that transforms abstract resource requirements into a structured, hierarchical framework. This structure is essential for effective cost estimation, procurement, team acquisition, and overall project control. But the important question now is, what is a resource breakdown structure? A resource breakdown structure is a hierarchical chart that decomposes and categorizes all the resources, such as team, equipment, materials, and supplies, required by the project. It's similar in concept to a work breakdown structure, but for resources instead of work. The key reason for its importance is that estimate activity resources process aims to determine the type and quantities of resources needed for each project activity. The resource breakdown structure is a primary output because it directly addresses this goal as follows. 1. Provides a structured framework for estimation. Instead of creating a disorganized list, the resource breakdown structure forces the project manager and team to think systematically about resource categories. This ensures no resource type is overlooked. 2. Enables accurate costing. The resource breakdown structure is a direct input to the estimate costs process. By having a clear, categorized list of resources, you can accurately assign costs, such as hourly rates for each labor category or rental fees for specific equipment. This prevents budget omissions. 3. Facilitates communication and clarity. The resource breakdown structure provides a common language for discussing resources with stakeholders, functional managers, and the procurement department. Saying, "We need 3 resources from the development team" branch of the resource breakdown structure is clearer than saying, "We need 3 more coders." 4. Supports procurement and team acquisition. The resource breakdown structure clearly distinguishes between internal human resources, external hires, leased equipment, and purchased materials. This tells the project manager what needs to be procured versus what needs to be acquired from within the organization. 5. Forms the basis for resource management. The resource breakdown structure becomes the master list of resources for the project. It is a key input for developing the resource management plan and is used throughout the project to track resource allocation and utilization. How can a poor resource breakdown structure output harm the estimate activity resources process? A poor resource breakdown structure doesn't just make the estimate activity resources process less effective, it actively undermines it and creates cascading failures throughout the project. Think of the resource breakdown structure as the foundation for your resource plan. A weak foundation causes structural problems in everything built on top of it. Here's how a poor resource breakdown structure specifically harms the estimate activity resources process and the project as a whole. 1. Inaccurate and incomplete resource estimates. This is the most direct harm. The estimate activity resources process is designed to determine the type and quantity of resources needed. A poor resource breakdown structure fails at this fundamental task as follows. First, missing resource categories. A poorly structured resource breakdown structure might overlook entire categories of resources. For example, a resource breakdown structure for a software project that only lists developers and testers but forgets DevOps engineers for deployment or UX designers for final reviews. The estimate will be incomplete, leading to last-minute scrambling and budget overruns. Second, lack of granularity and resource breakdown structure that is too high level, such as just labor and equipment, is useless for accurate estimation. For example, estimating cost for labor is impossible without knowing if you need a senior architect, $150 per hour, or a junior developer, $50 per hour. The cost estimate will be a wild guess. 2. Flawed cost and schedule estimates. The outputs of estimate activity resources are direct inputs to the estimate costs and estimate durations processes. A poor resource breakdown structure poisons these downstream processes as follows. First, unreliable cost estimates. Without a detailed breakdown of resource types and quantities, you cannot assign accurate costs. This leads to a budget that is either unrealistically low, such as missing resources, or unnecessarily high, such as overestimating to cover uncertainty. Second, unrealistic schedules. Activity durations are based on the availability and capability of the resources assigned. If the resource breakdown structure doesn't specify that you need a senior database administrator for a critical task, and you assign a junior one, the activity will take much longer than planned, derailing the project schedule. 3. Procurement and acquisition problems. The resource breakdown structure is a key tool for identifying what needs to be procured versus what can be acquired internally, as follows. First, procurement delays. A poor resource breakdown structure that fails to distinguish between internal staff and vendor resources will delay the procurement process. The procurement team won't have a clear list of what to buy or hire, leading to missed lead times for equipment and materials. Second, team acquisition conflicts. A vague resource breakdown structure, such as 5 engineers, creates confusion when requesting resources from functional managers. They won't know what specific skills are needed, leading to them assigning available but inappropriate staff, causing skill gaps and rework. 4. Ineffective resource management and allocation. The entire purpose of the resource breakdown structure is to provide a framework for management. A poor one makes management impossible, as follows. First, resource overallocation and conflicts. Without a clear hierarchy and categorization, it's difficult to see if the same specialized resource, such as a 3D animator, is being assigned to multiple concurrent activities. This leads to bottlenecks and resource conflicts. Second, impossible tracking. How can you track the usage and cost of materials if your resource breakdown structure doesn't break it down into software licenses, construction lumber, and network cables? You lose financial control. 5. Increased risk and unforeseen issues. A poor resource breakdown structure is a significant project risk in itself because it hides problems until it's too late, as follows. First, scope creep via hidden resources. New resources that were not identified in the resource breakdown structure will appear to be out of scope, leading to change requests, budget fights, and stakeholder dissatisfaction. Second, lack of contingency planning. A detailed resource breakdown structure helps identify risks related to scarce or specialized resources. A poor resource breakdown structure masks these risks, so you cannot plan contingencies, such as cross-training or vendor backup plans. In conclusion, while the initial list of resource types and quantities is the core of the estimate activity resources process, the resource breakdown structure is the vital output that gives that list structure, clarity, and utility. It is not an optional administrative exercise. It is a powerful management tool that bridges the gap between what work needs to be done, defined by the work breakdown structure, and what is needed to do it, enabling accurate budgeting, efficient procurement, and effective resource control throughout the project lifecycle. In contrast, a poor resource breakdown structure doesn't just result in a bad document. It cripples the core objective of the estimate activity resources process, which is to create a reliable and actionable plan for the people, equipment, and materials needed to succeed. The resulting inaccuracies ripple outward, causing budget overruns, schedule delays, procurement chaos, and ultimately, project failure. How important is the project documents updates output in the estimate activity resources process? The project documents updates output is critically important in the estimate activity resources process. It is not a minor administrative task but a core activity that ensures the project's knowledge base remains current, accurate, and useful for future processes and for maintaining control. Here's a detailed breakdown of why it's so important. 1. It's the primary mechanism for capturing the why and what. The main output of the process is the activity resource requirements. This document lists what resources are needed and how many. However, the project documents updates capture the context, assumptions, and lessons learned that led to those estimates, as follows. First, resource breakdown structure. Updating this document provides a hierarchical view of resources, which is invaluable for tracking, reporting, and ensuring you haven't missed a category of resources, such as forgetting to account for a specific type of software license or a skill set. Second, assumptions log. This is perhaps the most crucial update. Resource estimates are based on assumptions, such as we assume the senior developer has a 90% productivity rate, or we assume the equipment will be available for rent locally. Documenting these is vital because if an assumption proves false later, the project team can quickly understand the root cause of a resource shortfall or overall location. Third, lessons learned register. Documenting what techniques worked well, or didn't, for estimating resources on this project creates a knowledge base for the organization. It improves the accuracy of future estimates. 2. It creates a feed-forward loop for downstream processes. The resource estimates don't exist in a vacuum. They directly feed into other key project management processes. And the updated documents are the inputs for those processes, as follows. First, estimate costs. You cannot estimate costs accurately without knowing the resources. The updated resource calendars, showing availability and skill sets directly influence labor rates, rental costs, and material prices. Second, develop schedule. The type and quantity of resources available directly constrain the project schedule. You can't schedule 3 activities requiring the same specialist to happen simultaneously if you only have one specialist. The updated resource calendars are a direct input here. Third, plan procurement management. If the internal resources are not available or not cost-effective, the project will need to procure them. The detailed resource requirements documented here become the basis for statements of work and requests for proposal. 3. It enables effective resource management and control. A project manager's job is not just to create a plan but to manage against it. First, baseline for monitoring and controlling. The documented resource requirements and supporting assumptions become the baseline. During the acquire resources and manage team processes, you are comparing the actual resources acquired and their performance against this baseline. Second, proactive problem solving. By having a detailed resource breakdown structure and resource calendars, a project manager can proactively identify potential resource conflicts, bottlenecks, or overall locations before they cause schedule delays. Third, change management. If a stakeholder requests a change, the impact analysis must include resource implications. Having well-documented resource requirements makes this analysis faster, more accurate, and more defensible. How can a poor project documents updates output harm the estimate activity resources process? A poor project documents updates output doesn't just create a minor paperwork gap. It fundamentally undermines the entire value of the estimate activity resources process and creates cascading risks throughout the project. Here's a breakdown of how poor documentation in this area causes direct harm. 1. Loss of rationale and justification. This is the most immediate and insidious harm. The estimates become numbers without a story, making them impossible to defend or validate. The problem here is that without a well-maintained assumptions log, the reasoning behind estimates is lost. For example, if you estimated a task would take a junior resource 10 days. But the assumption was that a senior mentor would be available for guidance, that critical context is gone. As consequence, we have that when the senior mentor isn't available, and the task takes 15 days, you have no documented basis to explain the variance. The estimate appears to have been simply wrong, rather than being based on a condition that changed. This erodes stakeholder confidence and makes it difficult to justify necessary changes or additional funding. 2. Inaccurate and unreliable inputs for downstream processes. The estimate activity resources process feeds directly into cost estimation, scheduling, and procurement. Garbage in, garbage out. The problem here is that a poorly updated resource breakdown structure or resource calendar means the following processes are working with flawed data. First consequence, cost estimates will be wrong. If you forget to document the need for a specialized piece of equipment in the resource breakdown structure, you won't budget for its rental, leading to a budget overrun. Second consequence, the project schedule will be unrealistic. If resource availability and constraints, such as the electrician is only available half-time, aren't documented in the calendars, the scheduler will create an impossible plan that assumes all resources are available 100% of the time, guaranteeing delays. Third consequence, procurement will be delayed. If the need for contracted labor isn't clearly documented, the procurement process starts late, causing a direct schedule slip. 3. Inefficient and ineffective resource acquisition. The acquire resources process relies heavily on the outputs of estimate activity resources. Poor documentation makes acquisition slow and fraught with error. The problem here is that without clear, documented requirements, such as specific skill levels, certifications, or equipment specifications from the updated resource breakdown structure, the project manager or functional manager has to constantly go back to the team to re-clarify what is needed. As consequence, this leads to delays in hiring or assigning staff. Even worse, it can result in acquiring the wrong resources, like assigning a junior developer to a task that was estimated assuming a senior developer, which directly impacts quality and schedule. 4. Inability to manage and control the project. A project manager cannot control what they have not properly defined and documented. The problem here is the lack of a clear baseline for resource usage. When resources are over-allocated or underutilized, the project manager has no documented plan to identify the problem. As consequence, resource conflicts and bottlenecks are discovered only when they cause a crisis, such as two critical tasks need the same person at the same time. This forces reactive firefighting instead of proactive resource leveling and smoothing. 5. Missed learning opportunities and repeated mistakes. This harm affects not just the current project but the entire organization. The problem here is that neglecting the lessons learned register means losing valuable insights into estimation techniques, resource productivity, and supplier performance. As consequence, the organization is doomed to repeat the same mistakes on future projects. For example, if a team discovered that a specific software license took 3 weeks to procure but failed to document it, the next project manager will likely estimate 1 week, causing a delay. In conclusion, while the activity resource requirements is the direct, primary output of the process, The project documents updates output is the connective tissue in the institutional memory. A poor project documents updates output transforms the estimate activity resources process from a strategic, forward-looking planning activity into a mere guessing game. It severs the link between planning and execution, creating a project that is poorly defended, difficult to manage, and almost guaranteed to encounter preventable resource-related crises. The time saved by skipping thorough documentation is vastly outweighed by the time and money lost dealing with the consequences. As a final message, the project documents updates output ensures that the reasoning behind the numbers is preserved, facilitates integration with other project areas, and provides the necessary foundation for proactive project control. Ignoring this output turns resource estimation into a one-time, isolated guess rather than an integrated, manageable component of the project plan. This video is finished, but we will have in the next videos. 1. Creation of WBS for different projects using WBS Schedule Pro. 2. Examples of project plans using MS Project. And many more videos. Don't forget to give a thumbs up if you like this video and want us to continue with new topics. Subscribe to the channel. All content is free. You can also comment suggesting topics you would like to see on this channel. Thank you.